people as a whole, the communities as a whole, were suffering terrible impoverishment, and they were just a bunch of have-nots and not very few haves. Very often in the community, and you should pardon the expression, Palestine, the community in the ancestral homeland before there was a state, it was often made up in recent centuries of entirely alms receivers and the poor. And it was sustained almost in total, the Yishuv, before the advent of Zionism, by donations from the outside. That said, there have usually been Jews of all classes and in all strata of society, and Judaism has continued to have this appeal. Pharisaic Judaism did. The religion of the Sadducees was a religion of the Kohanim. It was a religion of priest and prince. It was not a religion of the peasant. It was a religion of the sacrifice and the temple and the ritual, and expensive rituals. Bringing these sacrifices were the Kol Nidre pledge. Everybody saw the animal, everybody saw its quality, everybody saw how much you were giving, everybody wanted to do everybody else one better, and show these better, and show it this way. And this was such an old tradition that it spans both temple periods. It is something that the prophets in the time of the first temple were railing against already. And historians are talking about it in the time of the second temple. And they were saying, if you rip each other off in business and you cheat, if you oppress the disempowered in society, we always the term ger v'yatom, the stranger, the orphan, almanah, the widow. If you take advantage of the disempowered in society, if you hold your slaves over time, in other words, if you neglect social justice, God is disgusted by the offerings that are brought. These offerings have meaning only after you've tended to social justice. The whole purpose of the ritual, the prophets tell us. And the sages pick up on this theme from the very beginning to the very end, from winding the tefillin on the arm, to lighting Shabbat candles, to blessing Kiddush. Everything ritual has meaning only as it carves and improves and directs the soul to social justice. That's the only purpose of the ritual. Now the next obvious question is, why do we need rituals then? Why can't we just cut to the chase and tend exclusively to social justice? Different class, but I'm glad you asked. And that we will at some point cover the value of Jewish ritual and some of the meanings in it. And that is part of, I have to say, so-called Kabbalah. Why are we standing during Kiddush? Why do we hold the wine? Why is it wine? There are all sorts of instructions about what direction to sleep in, not to face an open window while one is sleeping, which sock and shoe go on first and which are tied first. Who was taught this as a child by the Baba or the Zayda? No one? None of this? Some people were taught this. In traditional Jewish homes, there are memories about doing this. Now, give you a fascinating one. This is your first peek into Kabbalah that's not so mystical. It says directly, there is this quick reference in the Shulchan Aruch, and it's taught in Jewish homes to this day, at least in the Orthodox world, not to sleep facing an open window. Have you heard that? Ooh, an open door too. An open door or an open window? That's a different one. That's a different one. That's a different one. That's also how you sleep, and also Mizrach and all of that. But just, why no opening? Why can't you sleep towards an open door, an open window? Yes, a few people were heard this, a few people were taught this, and the Chazon Ish in his work, the name of which slips my mind at the moment, writes, because for most of our existence, the Chazon Ish, I believe he survived the Holocaust, I believe he died in 1946. So he is saying for most of the time we lived in agrarian areas. That means that there are crops growing outside. Usually the crop that's growing outside is wheat. When wheat is growing and wind comes, chaff blows off the wheat. If there's an open door or an open window and chaff blows in, you inhale it and it irritates the sinuses. Don't sleep towards an open door or an open window. Amazing. The Chazon Ish writes, Al pi Kabbalah mi avi mori. I received this al pi Kabbalah. That means in a verbal translation from my father, my master. That's Kabbalah. That's your first introduction before we get to the actual class. That's what Kabbalah is. Some of it is a little bit more mysterious than that. Some of it is not as easily intelligible and as pragmatic as that. But it is amazing to find what a pragmatic core exists behind these things. You know the story of the cut meatloaf. If you don't know this story very quickly, there is this daughter who sees her mother that every Rosh Hashanah she makes a meatloaf and she cuts part of the meatloaf off in half before the meal is done. Oh, it's brisket. Oh, yeah, I told the Kabbalah. See, I changed I gave a new dimension to the Midrash. Are we having meatloaf tonight? Is that why it's on my mind? Yeah? I don't know. Okay. So it was part of the brisket that's always cut. And the daughter asked the mother, why do you always cut part of the brisket off? It's a family tradition. It's a ritual. What does it mean? I have no idea. Well, why do you do it? Because I always saw my mother do it. She calls her mother. Her mother says, I have no idea. They have to call the Alta Baba, who is in Boca Raton. She just came in from water skiing. And they ask her, why is it that always, when I was growing up, the great-granddaughter, the daughter, the mother, they all want to know, why is it that when I was growing up, we were pork in the Lower East Side, you made a brisket, you always cut part of the brisket off, because the whole brisket didn't fit in the oven we had back there. Some of you haven't heard that yet, then it was worthwhile. I just shut the tape, but it's priceless. And therefore I had to put it in. And there is much in common human practice and in Judaism that derives from what we should call with respect folk wisdom. That is, people have lived this trial and error, they've learned, and we think of the accumulation of human wisdom as beginning with writing, and if it's not written down and recorded, it's almost as if it doesn't exist, but sometimes it comes down to us. That's a very scientific approach. You know, zoologists say if there is a species that's never been seen or hasn't been seen in a century, you know, you go out and you shoot it and you tag it. Well, why would we shoot it if it's rare? Well, if there's only one, then it's as if it doesn't exist anyway, and, you know, that kind of stuff, because it's not going to breed and whatever. But there's a lot of folk wisdom passed down, and that is a lot of the basis of Kabbalah. We have to say that the strength probably of what we call Kabbalah is in the filter that was used. What's in true Kabbalah is not what is in the tractate of Baba Maisa. What is in Kabbalah is what was filtered by the great sages, whose education, understanding, and learning in a wide variety of fields gave it a certain rational pattern that we cannot always detect. Sometimes. The Talmud, like the Torah itself, often speaks to us allegorically. We have that famous debate between Rabbi Eliezer and the sages, where he has all these strange miracles happen about the walls caving in and stuff. One of the things that he does is he says, if I am right, let the carob tree, this little carob plant, get up and walk. Well, you know how you say carob in Hebrew and in Aramaic? Carob, charuv. It's the same letters. Certain words like that, camel, gamal, rice always has an RS or RZ in almost every language. So this charuv, the carob tree, got up and walked towards the sages. Charuv was, this whole carob tree walking was a metaphor for an event that this student of Rabbi Akiva was projecting. He was projecting violence being brought upon the Jewish people that would in fact happen. The word in Hebrew for sword, the metaphor for violence, is cherev. The word for the carob tree, charuv. So he said, the carob, the charuv, the cherev, the sword, will approach you. And so if we see beyond, where it is, this isn't something as the sages have to do handsprings in the Torah to extract what we're hoping this metaphor might be, but the metaphor is very plain when you give it a little key or tip to it, and that is supposedly Kabbalah. Kabbalah is simply, you can't read it yourself, but you need the initiation. This strength of Judaism, so to speak, as well as perhaps its weakness, that it appeals to all classes and that there is not a great economic incentive and that it always costs to be a Jew, this might be the great strength and unifying point for the future. There were hands for questions and comments. Go ahead.
I just want to take you back to the thought. You spoke of the Karaites. Why didn't they ever grow? Was it only pragmatic because it was so uncomfortable? What happened with the Karaites? They're still in existence?
No. If you're a fundamentalist and you base your whole religion around the temple service, you kind of go out of business with the temple. As soon as the temple is destroyed and there are no more sacrifices, you have no more religion based on sacrifice. You're done. time to go. I mean, that is at least, in a simplistic overview of history, we have this, we